Hey guys, Argent here with a reactionary review of Atlas Shrugged. I know this is the poster for the movie Part 3, but this was the best kind of background image I could find. It's not really a visual story. So, Ayn Rand is one of those people who I have very mixed feelings about. There are some thinkers I just hate and I think are really bad. There are other thinkers I have mixed feelings about. Among them, bizarrely enough, Karl Marx. I actually don't hate the Communist Manifesto. At a certain level, I kind of see it as an anti-material, even though it's called historical materialism. I kind of see it as an anti-materialist, kind of populist manifesto. Um, I have a lot more sympathy towards the economic left than I do the social left, which I have no sympathy for. Carl Jung is another thinker I have mixed feelings about. On one hand, I kind of applaud his spiritualism and his kind of view of reality. On the other, I don't really like his religious indifferentism. Um, but yeah, Ayn Rand is one I have really mixed feelings about. I've never really been interested in libertarianism. Objectivism is kind of different, though. The exact philosophical differences are kind of hard to pin down. There's a lot of, and I did study philosophy at a university level. There's a bunch of like logical, systemic things that differ between them, but I'm not really that interested in that. My interest in university was more metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology to a lesser extent, but mainly kind of metaphysics. So I wasn't that interested in formal logic. That wasn't really my area of study. Just because I thought there was enough logicians playing word games, is kind of how I viewed a lot of it. But anyways, kind of to me, the difference between objectivism and libertarianism is objectivism is a lot more kind of aristocratic. It's a lot more anti-egalitarianism. It's a lot more moralistic and it's a lot more romantic. Um, as opposed to kind of like the cold rationalism of a lot of forms of libertarianism that just kind of use life as a series of equations and is often very cold. And I think there's a term they have, post-autistic economics, that some leftists came up with to describe libertarianism, and to some extent there's a lot of truth to that. Objectivism has a lot more kind of romanticism to it. It talks about like the struggle of man. It has a strong concept of heroes. It has a strong concept of personal achievement, of ideals, of idealism. It makes kind of judgments on the proper way to live. It has a defined concept of good and evil. Now, a lot of this is very non-traditional, um, but it's I don't find it to be a sterile philosophy in the same way a lot of libertarianism is. So I kind of like aspects of it. When I was reading Atlas Shrugged back in university, I read the abridged edition, of course, because the full edition is just really, really long and kind of difficult to get through. The abridged version is like half as long, which is still really long for a book. Most of what they took out was just people monologuing, so it's not like the plot really suffers. Um, and it kind of red pilled me a lot. Ayn Rand very, very strongly rejects the concept of equality. Um, there's a lot of different readings of her work. It's very complicated. It's very vague. She contradicts herself a fair bit, just in kind of her worldview. But I kind of it was really the first time I took the concept of kind of having a natural aristocracy seriously. I thought her criticisms of kind of mass culture, consumerism, kind of like just some pleb stuff, and the modern left to be very damning. Even though I probably have very different economic ideas from her, I did find her work certainly very interesting. So let's just go into the story. So the the world of Atlas Shrugged is in the near future. The movie, which I actually didn't think was that bad, takes place in a near future America at a dystopian United States. The country has a national legislature instead of a Congress and a head of state instead of president. Um, but it's kind of anachronistic and timeless. There's not really a specific date for America. It's kind of like Great Depression. Um, so basically, the Cold War hasn't happened. Most of the world has become communist, with America being the last mixed economy. America still has some vestiges of capitalism, and the rest of the world is communist republics, most of whom survive by donations of food and wealth from America. All the other countries on Earth have outlawed capitalism and have gone over to full central planning, and they're basically economic basket cases with increasingly repressive states. The few remaining companies tend to be some form of what's the term in Japan? Zebetsu? They're kind of state-sanctioned monopolies, in which a few politically connected people are able to maintain pretty much monopolies of the area of their particular form, be it transit, be it metal, be it drug production, whatever. And they get that largely through political favors and not because of the competency or inventiveness of their company, which is kind of interesting because it's kind of a criticism of not really a free market, but of kind of corporate capitalism and kind of special interest groups, which is kind of counter to what a lot of libertarians would argue for. I guess they would argue against the state being involved, but I don't see too many of them criticizing captains of industry to quite the same extent as Ayn Rand does. So the protagonist for our story is Dagny Taggart, who is the president of Taggart Transcontinental, the last remaining major railroad company in America. She attempts to keep the company alive as the government increasingly nationalizes parts of it. Her brother James Taggart, the railroad's president, is somewhat aware of the company's problems, but makes irrational decisions, and is basically a swipple. He makes irrational business decisions to try to appear more righteous and try to appear better in the public's eyes. Like he refuses to buy anything from Hank Rearden because he's kind of edgy, and instead buys it from people who charge more money and never deliver on what they promise. So he's just ineffectually running his company as kind of a social justice enterprise, and as that, it's collapsing. Fortunately, though, the government keeps providing them subsidies and bailing them out, so the company is still solvent and will probably always be solvent because of how poorly made, because of the complete lack of competition. So let's see here. In this, as in other decisions, Dagny simply continues her own policy, and just ignores her brother and tries to keep him away from things. Meanwhile, her past lover, Francisco Duaconia, her childhood friend and first love, appears to be destroying his family's international company without cause. He's a Chilean billionaire, and he basically dynamites all of his copper holdings throughout the world, which is causing a global metal crisis. I think what happened was the states of South America were planning on nationalizing most of his copper holdings, and rather than allow them to be taken over, he merely demolished them. The other character we have, the other main character, is Hank Rearden, who is a self-made steel magnate. He has developed an alloy called Rearden metal, now the most reliable metal in the world. The composition is secret. It is cheaper and stronger and lighter than steel. So he is widely despised for not giving the formula for Rearden metal to the masses, despite the fact that he paid the money to develop it. So Dagny wants to start rebuilding their railroads with Rearden metal, because Rearden metal is lighter, cheaper, and doesn't rust. So it's a lot. They don't have to repair tracks nearly as often. It will save the company a lot of money. I think the idea is just to put in rolling changes. So whenever they need to repair a track, they just rebuild it with Rearden metal, etc. So there's a lot of pressure to try and make her not use Rearden metal because Hank Rearden is a edgelord kind of. He's a businessman. He's a capitalist. Believes that he deserves to reap the profits for taking the time and money to develop Rearden metal. And frankly, I don't really disagree. I don't really have that much problem with there being rich people in society, particularly if they make a good or service people want. My criticism, I more kind of agree with the left on like bankers and people who currency speculate and just a lot of that stuff, kind of like the guys from Wolf of Wall Street. If Steve Jobs or Bill Gates invents something that is widely used and improves society, and they make a product that is like comprehensible and coherent, I see no reason why they can't be fabulously wealthy from that. So I really like Hank Rearden. So his career is kind of hampered by feelings of obligation to his wife, mother, and younger brother. They basically despise him. They hate him. They basically call him greedy, selfish. They keep demanding he give them money for various causes. They won't let him publicly announce they supporting this causes. So his brother's like, give me money. I want to give it to this charity, probably I think it's like some social justice warrior Swipple charity. And I will give them the money, and I'll say it's from me, and you can't say that you gave anyone charity money because you're evil. So yeah. So Dagny also becomes acquainted with Wesley Moch, a Washington lobbyist working for Rearden, whom he betrays and later notices that the nation's most capable business leaders abruptly disappearing, their industries collapsing. This is kind of where we get to the Atlas Shrugged part. Basically, it's so difficult for people like Hank Rearden, Dagny Taggart, Francisco de Inconia to operate their businesses and to basically get what they feel is their just rewards for doing an immense service to the economy and for producing essential goods and services and doing it in an efficient and cost-effective manner, and so they just give up and leave. The idea being there's no real point in continually struggling if society won't appreciate them and won't allow them to make the money and do what they want to do. And this is kind of where we get the aristocratic thing. These people are kind of like, they aren't just wealthy people. I think that's important to keep in mind. These are people of vision, of creativity. These are people who kind of have an aristocratic attitude. They pay their staffs well. They reward competency and loyalty. They aren't primarily motivated by money. They're motivated by a desire to create a good product. They're motivated by a desire to kind of prove their will, to prove their competency, to prove their capability. And in that they almost have a disdain for money because they're willing to destroy their businesses on principle. So in kind of their disdain for money and their love of kind of achievement, they kind of remind me of old school aristocrats. And that's kind of something I liked about this. So yeah. So the most recent person to shrug is Wyatt, the founder and sole supervisor of Wyatt Oil, who leads the largest remaining oil company, who sets his wells on fire before disappearing. Politicians have tried to search for these people, but they have completely disappeared. Economic conditions continue to worsen as many of the core commodities and industries of the country collapse amidst the shrugging. The citizens are now often heard repeating, "Who is John Galt?" in response to questions to which the individual has no answer. It sarcastically means, don't ask important questions because we don't have answers, or more broadly, what is the point? Why bother? So having demonstrated the reliability of Rearden metal in a railroad line that Dagny names after John Galt, Hank Rearden and Dagny Taggart become paramours, And yeah, so they start having an affair. Uh, Hank Reardon manipulates the legal process to divorce his wife, who hates him, and she takes up with Dagny's brother and then later commits suicide. The reasons are kind of confusing, and I didn't really understand them. So they begin trying to track down who John Galt is, and they discover among the ruins of an abandoned factory an incomplete motor that transforms atmospheric static electricity into kinetic energy, which basically would provide an infinite, renewable, clean power source when they're made, of which they seek the inventor. Eventually, this search reveals the reason of business leaders' disappearances. When Dagny pursues a scientist to Galt's Gulch, I'm skipping over a lot of just kind of the investigative stuff. The character John Galt appears as the engineer who designed the infinite electricity motor. The character John Galt is leading an organized strike of business leaders against the government. So reluctant to forsake the railroad, Dagny leaves Galt's Gulch, but Galt follows Dagny to New York City. I'll talk about Galt's Gulch in a minute. And then he hacks into a national radio broadcast and delivers a 70-page speech about objectivism. As the government continues to collapse, John Galt is tortured. There's kind of a funny scene where he's being tortured and the electricity machine breaks. So he's like, I can just repair that machine. And they're like, well, we're going to use it to torture you. And he's like, yes, but it pisses me off that it's not functional and that you people are competent enough to repair it. And they're just like completely shocked. So the authorities capture Galt, but he is rescued by his partisans. New York City loses electricity and the world collapses, with John Galt announcing that they will return to take over the rest of the world. An interesting other part is, I don't think the character was mentioned, but in my review, but there's also Ragnar Danskold, I think his name is, who is the world famous pilot who seizes the ships that full of economic redistribution that the United States sends to the people states of Europe. He works to ensure that once those espousing Galt's philosophy are restored to their rightful place in society, they will have enough capital to rebuild the world. So let's see here. So he has basically been stealing gold over the last couple decades, and his plan is to reimburse all the captains of industry for the amount of money that's been stolen from them. So he has a bunch of gold that he's going to give like Hank Reardon for the cost of producing Reardon metal, etc. I also forgot to mention that Dagny also leaves Hank Reardon to become the lover of John Galt, which he accepts being cucked, because that's kind of how it works. He does a big speech about how he wishes to kill Robin Hood. Not the historical Robin Hood, because he refers to the historical Robin Hood as being a champion of natural property rights. So yeah, they will restore the gold to everyone, and they'll be able to reestablish their businesses once they come back from exile and take over the world. So America collapses. There's a bunch of just other random shit they put in, like there's like some super weapon the government develops for no adequately explored reason that they try to take over. There's a bunch of just kind of dumb side plots. Ayn Rand is not a very good writer. The problem with this book is that it's not really a story. It's more of kind of a novel of ideas. It's kind of large portions of it are just there to espouse her philosophy, and she often kind of forgets that this is a novel and that there should be some like character development or a plot or something. And a lot of times just elements of it just seem to be forgotten. Like characters will just kind of disappear. They'll kind of forget to talk about something, etc. So as a book, it's not great. It's kind of interesting. I'd probably recommend reading the abridged version, but I didn't talk not much detail about the story because it's not that important. So what can we learn from this? I think my biggest issue with it is just the endorsement of polyamory. I really hate polyamory. I really hate kind of all that stuff. Like it, I really believe in one man, one woman for life. I don't see sex and marriage as just solely being about personal pleasure. I see it as a spiritual necessary for the completion of both man and women for the purpose of reproducing and carrying on civilization as well as mutual companionship and love. Maybe that makes me a pansy or something. I don't know. So that's an issue I have with it. What are some other issues that I have? I do like the aristocracy. I do like the kind of the portrayal of the plebs, kind of like the plebs are running the country. The kind of the open-ended commitment to equality has put people who have no business being in charge in charge. Kind of the wayward masses just keep voting for more and more shit, even though it will cause society's collapse because they have no time preference. They can't think rationally and they can't manage their desires. They're just so greedy and selfish that they're willing to just loot society. I take a lot of kind of my philosophy of government and politics from Ayn Rand. She kind of views democracy as an inherently nihilistic enterprise in which it's just a choice between various parties who will loot the state and loot society in general to pay off their supporters. The worst she feels is kind of pleb tier left-wing populists who just basically, rather than trying to uplift the masses, just try to downgrade the aristocrats and superiors in society. So there's very much a rejection of natural equality in Ayn Rand's books. There's very much kind of this idea that not everyone can be an entrepreneur, not everyone can be an aristocrat. And this is kind of where we find a difference, I find, between this and traditional libertarianism. Traditional libertarian kind of ism, at least in my experience, posits that everyone's basically the same and everyone can be a millionaire entrepreneur. Whereas Ayn Rand says, no, not everyone can be a millionaire entrepreneur, but that's okay. And it's for the betterment of society as a whole, even though she's kind of obsessed with selfishness. But if everyone acts in their self-interest, that will lead to a more efficient society, a more prosperous society, and that'll lead to the creation of technological inventions like Rearden metal, which will be for the betterment of everybody. So everybody has a rational self-interest to pursue their own desires because it will result in a better outcome for everyone. So that's kind of interesting. So yeah, I like the anti-democratic parts of it. I like the romanticism. John Galt is portrayed as a hero. Dagny's portrayed as a hero. Hank Rearden's portrayed very positively as a sympathetic hero. The commitment to capitalism and kind of libertarian economics doesn't really stem from kind of stuffy economic arguments. It stems from very much kind of this heroic, almost Greek-like view of human nature, of kind of the man god who has the right to rule by virtue of his superior abilities. And I really do like that. So I suppose my biggest issues are just the polyamory, the anti-religious nature. I don't really fully agree with her economics, but I do think she has a lot of interesting things to say about social policy, about politics in the world in general. So no, I'd recommend Atlas Shrugged. I think it's a pretty interesting book. I think objectivism is an interesting philosophy. I don't share it. I'm more along the lines of, I guess, right-wing populism or nationalism or fascism or something like that. But objectivism is certainly interesting, and it's interesting to study other political ideas. Even if you aren't necessarily going to agree with them, I think it is useful to have multiple perspectives. That doesn't mean you accept them or agree with them, but you may just learn something from looking at someone, particularly if they are an intelligent person who can kind of formulate an interesting argument. So that's my thoughts on the matter. This is Argent Templar signing out.